So just one more time, my name is Marcy. I lead grassroots community at Fiverr. I'm so excited to be in the same room, virtual room, as all of these fantastic community builders. Hi, Beth, how are you? And we're going to talk about remote community building today. So I want to start off by just acknowledging how the word community has become so very widely used in the past few years. And a lot of companies use community as a buzzword to talk about anything from their email list to their entire base of customers. But sometimes that means they're not really a community. Start off today just by talking about what community looks like at each of our companies, and then we're going to discuss the inevitable, which is how our approach to community has changed because of COVID-19, kind of like how we have kept up engagement, but also what long-term effects we think this is going to have on our programs. And I also think we all are coming from a very different place of how we approach community at our companies, and so I think this is going to be a really, really cool conversation. Just a quick reminder for everybody watching, we are going to have a live Q&A, probably like the last 15 minutes of this conversation. So it would be great if you could just type out your questions in a note on your computer as you're watching and as you have them. And then before the last question, I'll go ahead and ask you to put those in the chat so we don't have those getting lost during our conversation, because we definitely want to see those. One other thing, we wish we could all be in the same room right now. I know especially the people on this call, we're like craving that in-person connection. But since we can't, we do want you to be as active on the chat as you'd like to be. We want to feel like you're in the room with us. So if Beth or Sophia or Tracy or Joe says something that you really resonate with, give them like a heck yeah or a woohoo or just some exclamation points, so we know you're there and you're excited about what they're saying. So with that said, let's get started. First, for all of the panelists, can you please introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about what you do at your company and also what your company is, and what community means to you. And I know that's a lot, so if you need a reminder on any three of those parts, just let me know. So we'll start with Beth and then move to Tracy, Sophia, and then wrap it up with Joe.
Cool. Hi, everybody. And good morning from where I am. Good afternoon from maybe wherever you are. I am Beth McIntyre. I'm the head of community at CMX. The CMX community is a space for community professionals of all levels, specialties, goals, and objectives to come together to find the resources they need in order to thrive. So I manage all of the different aspects of our community. We have both online and offline spaces, as well as job boards and newsletters and articles. I started our traditionally in-person space, CMX Connect, which grew quite well in the first year. And then, oh my gosh, what does community mean to me?
It's a big one.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up. I think community is about building meaningful connections, about feeling kind of like a fellowship with other people. The community industry, which we all work in, is about us building a space for people to feel those connections and for relationships to develop. I truly believe that human interaction, whether it's in person or online, can solve some of the world's biggest problems. And sometimes people just need a space to start that conversation. And so I think that the community industry gives people that space.
Well said. Amazing. Tracy, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Capiello. I'm a program manager of community at Google, specifically focusing on our Google Maps community of local guides. They're people just like you and me who add really helpful information to maps, whether it's like literally putting, Joe, I'm going to go your local tea shop on the map, or adding photos, reviews, and accessibility attributes about a business. And I've been on the team for just about 8 years, and my claim to fame is that I was a member of the community prior to joining. So I think that has been a really exciting way to just see, also as my role has shifted over the past 8 years, how community has changed so much. So I think I covered that. And then for me, to build on what Beth said, because a total like +1 plus 100 is that, a lot of people do use community as a buzzword. But for me, it's really about finding a place where you fit in. And you don't always have to fit in, but there are the shared values and interests. And it's also a place where you can grow. So it's not necessarily, for me, it's creating that space, as Beth said, where you can also grow and learn, whether it's, and I think especially with this year, it's learning about folks from other countries who speak other languages or who face other issues. And I think just like Beth, Beth, like so many kudos there, that really when we focus on people and community, we can solve a lot of problems and just make people feel like they have a mission in life that is beyond maybe what their work or personal interest is.
Awesome. Sophia, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Super stoked to be here with these amazing panelists. I think we're up for a great conversation. I'm Sophia Rodriguez. I'm reporting to you all live from Bay Area of California in the US. I'm a community manager for Salesforce. And if some of you are thinking CRM, Salesforce, you're right. Our community has been around since 2006. It's called the Trailblazer Community. We have over 1,000 user groups that host more than 300 meetings per month across 80 countries. And we also have 200 MVPs. And MVPs to us, there are super users, folks who are product experts, are being leaders in the community and are really contributing. So we have given them the award of MVP. And I also co-lead one of our internal communities for Latinx and Hispanic employees. We have 13 chapters and over 2,500 members. But when I'm just talking to someone on the street who maybe doesn't know what a community manager does, I simplify everything I do into saying I connect, empower, and enable people.
Love that. It's great.
That's awesome. Sweet. Should I?
And then Joe, yeah, go ahead.
Of course. Well, like first off, like I think between Beth, Tracy, and Sophia, I think they've wrapped everything up really nicely there. So I can only hope to add to it. But let me say I'm in awe of all three of them already. I run a community called the Marketing Meetup. It started as a hobby, but over the past 4 years, it's grown into a community of about 17,000 marketers across the UK, and then started in the USA, in New York at the beginning of this year. Far more important than what we do, though, however, is how we do it. The Marketing Meetup is a place where people come together, and we use the phrase "be positively lovely," which literally just, it is the most British sounding phrase in the world, and I feel very conscious of it right now too. But it's a place where we can look after each other and we can grow and we can come together and feel safe. I'm far more introverted than I'm extroverted, so it was really important to me that the Marketing Meetup community felt like a safe place for these people. Just to wrap up what I think community is, as an introvert, I can't think off the top of my head, so I had to write it down into 4 key points, much of which has been covered off, which is a place of common interest. It's a place of support, learning and growth, a place where we can all come together and make each other stronger than we'd be by ourselves. And I think importantly for this conversation, given we're also thinking about the interaction between community and corporates, it's a place where people can interact with each other beyond just a broadcast from an organisation which sits above. It enables people to speak below and to each other, which, yeah, I think that's generally my general overview.
Awesome. This is such a good group of people. I'm so excited. I'm also selfishly just like excited to be in the same room with all of you because I'm actually in Sophia, Tracy, and Beth's community. And Joe, I don't think we've talked about this yet, but I used to work at Meetup. And so we all have like a connection in some form or fashion. I also love this theme that all of you mentioned of just like people pouring in and like loving other people, and that being like this basis of connection and inspiration with all of our communities. And so, yeah, let's get started. So Beth, I want to direct this first question to you. In community building, we talk a lot about authenticity. So what do you think that means from a business perspective? I
think that authenticity is kind of the most important part of community building in business. I actually saw in the chat, Amanda said, I think the community-based businesses are going to beat out the corporate big businesses in the years to come. And I was like, yes, definitely, Amanda. I think the beauty of community is that your members don't stand for anything less than true authenticity. Even more so these days, people can see right through a company's motives with sales and marketing. I think the customer support world has changed. And the one thing that truly does remain constant is the customer or the community. I think there are like the most important aspect of a business is the people who are in there, the experience they have. Word of mouth can truly make or break a brand. And so when it comes to being authentic, I think it's a no-brainer that every business has to be authentic.
Perfect. Does anyone else want to add to that?
I think it's almost a given, really, because the whole idea of a community is that people come as themselves first. You know, that they interact as human beings, as Beth has said, and you can't act as human beings if you've got that kind of veneer or that agenda. You know, everyone's walked into those rooms where you see the dollar signs rolling in people's eyes before they've even started having a conversation with you. So that's not an experience that people want to feel. So with that, it's our responsibility as community leaders, but also as people engaging in communities, to come as ourselves, and that is truly authentic.
And I think it is also, if I can add on, a little bit about the company or the product kind of speaking for itself. So like I said, marketing has changed so much, and it's no longer like customers no longer listen to what the company tells them they're buying or how amazing it is. Instead, we turn to our friends and our families and say, you know, what do you think of this restaurant, or what do you think of this product? So I think that authenticity really does come from like the customers, the community knows the product better than anybody else. And so we're going to just let it talk for itself instead of us trying to sell you on something or market it to you in a certain way. And I also think if your community members sense even a little bit that you're not being authentic, they'll leave.
Call you out on it.
I totally agree with that.
Which is what it should be. I think that's another part of real community isn't just like checking off a box. Like we should have a community. It should be something where there's flexibility for, I think maybe Beth or Sophia said it's a living, breathing thing. You shouldn't just ask people to give you things. You should be giving them back value as well. So I think that's something when I creep in on other communities, I'm like, oh, this is nice, but you know, a community member led conversation as opposed to, you know, asking, what is your favorite X product?
Totally. And I'm sure you've all had the experience where someone like a business owner comes to you and they're like, I know I need to develop a community program. How do I do that? And my first question is like, do you need to do, like, what's the value for your community? Why do you feel like you need to do that? So I think that goes along with what you're saying of like, just make sure you're doing it in the right way, not you're just doing it because you know you need to do it and it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, just put some more thought into it. Very cool. So I want to move to Tracy for this one. Also goes along with what we were just talking about. Why should brands be focusing on community development, and what should their approach be to building a community?
Yeah, well, that's perfect actually. So I think I can't talk about community without acknowledging I've already seen some of my own community members. So so hello, local guides from we've got Cyprus, I think, in Bangladesh, and it's just so fabulous. And of course you, Marcy, so thanks. So I think that speaks volumes that folks that I engage with in the community, and while I'm not in the day-to-day of it and I'm more in the operational side of it, it's just phenomenal that folks are here in this space, which is very different. So, you know, with backing into that, what I had said previously was that you have to make sure that you're not just checking off a box. Is there something that you can really deliver? Can you dedicate the resources to it? So I feel like, yeah, obviously like focusing on the why, but I do think every almost nearly every business can benefit from having a community and having a community development and engagement plan, because you can do great things and meet your business goals by focusing on your community members, whether it's figuring out how you're going to address their feedback, opening a two-way conversation with them, or even just, again, as others have said, which I feel like we'll keep giving each other kudos because we're all just like super geniuses, right? Is that you can much better tell a story and a message if your community members are doing it for you. And I think it's all about building that out. So you should be focusing on community development, especially at a time like this, because communities, whether we're talking about in an online sense or just having this shared sense of vision and connectedness with others, transcends all kinds of barriers, whether it's socioeconomic barriers, of course, with some considerations given that internet connectivity is not the same around the world. It's not even the same from my normal house in Brooklyn to where I am in the mountains in Pennsylvania, to transcending accessibility concerns, languages, and geographic areas. So it's something that can really achieve all of your business goals, transcend all of those barriers, as long as you are taking that right approach in building it to start. And I think the biggest thing you should focus on is if you can really, can you serve your community best by launching a community, or are you first serving your business goals?
That's perfect. Sophia, Joe, or Beth, do you wanna add to that?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Tracy said, and I'll just add to make it really simple. If you're not already focusing on community development, you're behind. Community development is good for business, and that's something that you care about.
Perfect.
Feels good.
So yeah, that too. Well, yeah, and it connects people to each other rather than your brand, which of course you want people to think about your brand in a certain way, but they shouldn't do that because of your logo or your ads on TV. They should do that because they have an emotional connection to it, and that's what your community program does. I'm not going to even step on my soapbox about that one, but so kind of in tandem to this, but looking at a different side of it, how do you measure the strength of a community? And I know that's a broad question, so you can take that in terms of like actual metrics or anecdotes or impact. But let's start with Sophia on that one, but I would love to hear everyone's perspective.
Yeah, amazing question. And luckily there are a lot of measures we can use to measure strength. And many of these folks are probably already familiar with the type of metrics that are used, but I think it's really going to come down to what is important to your business and what is going to help you tell the story of your community. So we could take, for example, an offline community with user groups. You might be interested in looking at the number of events per month, RSVPs versus check-ins, repeat attendees, year-over-year growth. With an online forum, this might mean the time that people are spending on the page, your monthly active users, the number of topics that you have, new member signups, or the total logins versus unique logins. For support communities, this could be the number of questions. Interesting one is how many questions are being answered by your community versus how many are being answered by your team or your company. And also how quickly are those questions being answered. The list goes on, but I think something that you all are very lucky with is that beyond this amazing panel, people that are incredibly helpful, the community of community professionals are some of the warmest and most helpful people I've ever met. So the framework, the documents, the guidelines, they're all there for you, and everyone's very cool about letting each other borrow their notes. But something that I really wanted to touch upon is, I think for me, a true testament of strength in a community is more of a qualitative measurement. It's not really given the weight that it deserves, I think, because it's very hard to really measure, but it's how resilient your community is in the face of crisis or a setback. And I think this is something that a lot of communities have been grappling with, especially during the pandemic. We saw that engagement was down, activity was down, people might have been more easily dissatisfied. But if your community was still thriving and was able to bounce back, I think that is almost the epitome of all your work coming together to show that you have built a community that isn't just surviving off of extrinsic rewards, but intrinsic rewards. They're motivated to continue. But of course, I'm going to hope that none of us ever have to face any more crises or setbacks. So I think the first couple of metrics that I mentioned are a great place to start.
Perfect.
Absolutely. I just, I wouldn't answer the question directly, but I'd sort of give credence to what Sophia said, and that I think the value of community has been proven during this time more than any other. And it's inevitably one of those things where when we face times like we have done recently, folks immediately start saying, okay, I'd love to lean back on the community that I've built. Well, in fact, the best time to build a community was yesterday, but the second best time is today. But, you know, it's absolutely, you know, build your community before you need it. Because in moments like this, it is absolutely these times where the strength of these organizations, but these groups of people coming together really comes to the fore.
Amazing. Let's go ahead and move on, because I want to get to remote community building as quickly as possible, because I know that's why people are here today. But I do have one more question about community in general, and that's about the size of your community. So does size matter? And I want to start with Joe for this one, because I know in the meetup world this is a big question. So what do you think about the size of your community? Does it, you know, change your ability to create connection, or is it more just about the quality?
It absolutely kills me. It absolutely kills me when people speak about the size of their community as if it matters. So fundamentally, if we're going back to first principles, the first thing is we're looking to create human connection. And whether that's in a room of 3 people playing a board game, or whether that's in a room of 1,000 people at an expo, if these people are interacting with each other on a one-to-one basis, or even a 1-to-2, or whatever it is in a small group, that is the absolute essence of community right there. The only thing that I'd add to that is that as you look to scale your community, as it grows naturally and organically over the course of time, you're able to get access to different kinds of conversations that you wouldn't necessarily be able to have otherwise. I say this from personal experience, where in year 1 and 2, I was having like a very different kind of conversation and a different level of speaker or a different level of sponsor to what I have in year 3 and 4. So that has ultimately come about as a result of the community growing and interacting with us more and more, and then making more noise. But fundamentally, if your end goal is just to create human connection, allow people to elevate each other, look to help and support a group of people, then heck no, it absolutely doesn't matter. Get your 10 people and make them your most favorite community super fans in the entire world, because they're absolutely the people that matter beyond any other, and just grow like that.
Can add to that, Joe. Yeah, it's absolutely above all about quality over quantity. But of course, I should say, of course it is. And then I think it's important from the start, if you are in the early stages of developing your community plan, your strategy, and your 5-year plan, you should also. It would be silly for those of us who work for larger organizations to just ignore the fact that quantity will matter at some point or another. But what we did very early on is manage the expectations for our community, and it's all about picking those metrics that are going to be most impactful and how the community is scaling itself through the community. So you don't have to necessarily worry about that. But I know most people, getting the resourcing and the funding for communities is really often contingent on quantity, but having those quality and impact metrics are super key as well. So I did want to call that out, but I don't go around bragging we have over 1 million local guides in our community, because that doesn't really matter. It's all about the meaningful conversations again, and what that translates to. So
for sure, and I absolutely agree, and I guess I sit in a slightly privileged position that the person I answer to is myself in this context, So, but I think we'd both agree, and it's pretty much exactly what you said, to the point that if you start out from that place of that fundamental looking to create that connection, that it almost sort of breeds itself over the course of time, to the point where that growth almost becomes coincidental, because the values and everything that you set out up front just absolutely fly over the course of time. So I'd love this conversation because like it's such a view into a different world, even within the same subject. So it's awesome to see. So thank you for that.
Tracy, I think to your point too, we could probably have an entire another panel about how to like advocate for a community program within your company, but then also how to explain it externally. So maybe we'll have to put that together for another day. Cool. So I want to move to talking about how COVID has changed all of your communities. And I know that probably looks really different for all of you because I think some of you didn't have an online component beforehand. I know we had our forum, but all of our events were offline. So we've had to make this like crazy shift to Zoom webinars and icebreakers and hop in. So I'd love to start with Beth on this one. How have you seen your community change in the past 4 months?
Oh gosh.
I know that's a huge question.
Well, that's okay. They're all great questions, and I think that it's wonderful. Well, I think that from where I sit, it's kind of a cool perspective because within my community are multiple people growing their own communities. So I did kind of get to see this like mass migration. Communities all over the place were pivoting their strategies completely. I know a lot of people and a lot of communities had a difficult time changing and adapting, but for others, it was definitely a beautiful show of resilience. And Sophia, I think you spoke about that. You probably have some really beautiful stories about that. For our in-person program, CMX Connect, I definitely scrambled a bit. I shared resources and I gave support and I made space for our volunteer leaders to ask questions and seek advice. It was almost like resource vomit. I was like, okay, this is everything I can think of to give you. But then in March, like almost all of our events were canceled. So that was kind of a moment for me where I thought, okay, well, I've done everything I can. Rest in peace, CMX Connect. But then in April, it was amazing and that resilience piece. So the analogy I use is the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, if you've seen that movie. At the very end, after the Grinch has stolen Christmas, there's this moment of silence and you think, oh no, it's dead. And then all of a sudden you start to hear this singing and the spirit comes back. And I feel like that is kind of the thing that I heard was that singing in the CMX community, that nothing could destroy my community spirit. So we successfully migrated to virtual events. And the month after March, in April, we were kind of back at it and continuing to grow. So yeah, I think it was really cool there. And then as part of our already online community, Sophia mentioned that, you know, there are some communities that didn't have as much engagement during that time. Us, on the other hand, saw a huge uptick in engagement because that was when all of the community professionals were coming together and like asking strategy, asking for advice, sharing resources, like talking it out. I think that, you know, communities are already a space that members go to feel like they belong. And when your world around you is so uncertain, you know, people rely on that safe space even more so. So it was cool to see that there was no like wheel reinventing going on. People really stepped up to the plate to share their resources and talk about strategies and to connect with each other. So it was really, I think it was a really cool experience.
And just to give an extra shout out to you, I'm part of the CMX Slack community, and that was where I went for a ton of resources when we were trying to figure out our shift. So thank you for helping moderate that and having that as a resource for us. Tracy or Joe or Sophia, do you want to add any major changes you had in your community over the last few months?
Yeah, I mean, I will say we did have an online presence. We've always had an online community, and we have an annual event that we unfortunately did have to cancel. However, it was really heartwarming to see the response to that cancellation. You know, we were transparent about why we had to cancel the event, how it was ultimately what we weren't able to do. But in the online community, as well as through the self-organized activities, our own community members, everything that they have in common, or the biggest reason that they come together, is because they love going out and exploring their worlds. And so suddenly with the, and this is something we all experience as well, you know, for me, I love going out to restaurants. I love, you know, doing all of that stuff, experiencing new places. I then shifted to breweries that had home delivery. And so all of the things that I was personally going through myself was everything that our community members were experiencing as well. And so I was looking for upskilling, you know, and ways to connect with other people, learn about new topics, and our community members were doing the same thing. So we saw a really nice increase in the amount of activity that they were taking online as in our forum, as well as in hosting meetups. So that was really great to see that they were like, okay, we can't go out and you know, clean plastic off of beaches, because that was a campaign that was self-started in the community, or go out and sample all of the different noodle restaurants in my neighborhood. But we can talk about what we did, how you can do this yourself in the future, and where we're going to go. So that was really just so beautiful.
Amazing. And Joe, I would love your perspective on this too, because Meetup is historically all in person. So what did that look like for you?
It was crazy. I mean, to speak, you know, to the emotions that Beth sort of mentioned there, you know, I in fact spent 4 days feeling incredibly sad about the community, because so we planned 140 in-person events for the year, and it was on March the 13th that we had to cancel all of our events. And I remember sending the email, and then likewise, such a great analogy with the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, you know, just sort of sitting there and going, well, that's it. And actually what happened was, over that weekend, we shifted everything from in-person to online. And, you know, I sort of filmed what I could and approached the world's most famous marketing speakers, and we were lucky that, you know, 5 or 6 said yes. So we built a pretty ridiculous webinar schedule straight away, which was amazing. The result of this was actually within a couple of weeks of COVID striking and our entire in-person event schedule stopping, we built a whole new set of momentum that, like, has been unseen for the community so far. You know, we had like multiple thousands of people join, you know, who wouldn't have done it before. People from Australia, New Zealand, Macedonia, Egypt, all these amazing countries who never have access to our stuff before. So that was amazing. And it actually taught me a really great lesson, in fact, two. The first is that it never really mattered if we did stuff in person or online. Like, there was a far greater purpose behind all of this stuff. So the shift from in-person to online events was actually relatively easy. It wasn't horrible, you know, it was just like, okay, we can't do that thing, so we're going to do this, but we're still going to be doing it for the same purpose. The second thing is that we will one day go back to in-person events, which, you know, yeah, well, it will happen, you know, one day we will. And after that, we were purely in person, as in before. But after, when we go back, then we'll pursue a far more hybrid model where we'll have both online and offline. That will both increase the audience, increase our ability to find speakers from around the world, but then also make it far more inclusive and welcoming to people who wouldn't necessarily be able to make it in person too. So it's been a crazy journey. You know, it's been really a crazy 3 months, and I'm pretty sure that all of us can speak to that, whether it's building a community or just in our personal lives. But there's been a lot of change, and it's not all been bad by any means.
Agreed. I want to be mindful of time, so I'm going to squish a couple of questions together. So the main questions are, what new tools have you been using, or could be tools you are already using, that you feel like have fostered the best connection online? And then any tips you have for using those platforms that you think people starting out and using those would really find valuable. And we can just do, let's start with Sophia, and then we'll go Tracy, Joe, and then Beth.
Great question. We have actually kept it pretty simple with our virtual meetings. We've mostly used Zoom and Google Meet. I think it's something that works out really nicely for our community. But I will say that there has been such a great opportunity for this industry to almost start creating new solutions, where now I'm seeing a bunch of tools for, icebreakers to imitate the feel and look of a conference, of being there in person. Even the tool that we're on right now, which has been around for a while, but I've seen a lot of this being used. So I think for us, just because we're very much so at scale, we want to keep things simple. So we were looking for tools that most people were already familiar with.
Perfect.
Yeah, sure.
Tracy, do you
For
want to go next?
the most part, we continue to use our existing tools. And I think the biggest game changer for us was when Google Meet, and this is not a plug, although I personally love Google Meet and I use it in my own personal community building efforts, was that was made available to everyone, the enterprise or, the G Suite version. But for the most part, toward what Sophia was saying at the end of her statement, was that we didn't really introduce any new technology to our own community. We just let them figure out what worked best for them within our existing platforms, and they were able to promote it. But I can't echo that recommendation for Hopin, this platform, enough, as well as for Icebreaker, because I found them to be so cool and just make everything so much easier to interact personally.
Very cool. Joe, do you want to go next?
Likewise, we selected Zoom fairly early on. It seems to be the thing that most people are familiar with. We use it in two different ways. So we've got a webinar style format, which is familiar, in this style, and then we've also got online networking, where we use their breakout function. So we'll send people off into groups of 5 for 15 minutes and do two of those sessions within like a 45-minute period. So that's the same bit of technology that's in effect replaced both the learning and the networking aspects of our events. And then, being the one person sort of company sitting on top of this community, so to speak, then it's just about the scrappy startup stuff. So we use a lot of MailChimp to get the word out. We layer in stuff like Eventbrite to also use our ticketing. We use our existing meetup groups. We use a lot of Fiverr for all of our graphics and stuff like that, so I do need to give the plug there, which in fact has given a whole new layer of professionalism to everything as well. Yeah, there's the whole range of tools that we've been using. I'd say Zoom, Eventbrite, MailChimp, Canva, Fiverr, all of the startup kit that's being used yet.
Awesome. Beth, I think they took most of them, but do you have any others to add? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I'm going +1 to Icebreaker. Tracy just shared that link in the chat. I think that we were even using that before we all moved virtual. We were using it before in-person events, so people had a chance to meet before they met in person. And I'm like, hands down, I love the team there as well. So it's just a great tool. And then we're using Bevy for all of our event planning and stuff. Traditionally, Bevy's used for in-person, but we moved to virtual, and the team there realized that having our own virtual event like in the native app or like native to the app was super important. So they actually built a virtual event platform within Bevy. So that was exciting for me because all of a sudden we had this tool that everyone could just use. But that's the only difference, I would say. Pretty much everything else is the same as everyone else.
Yeah. I actually just demoed the Bevy virtual platform the other day. It looks awesome. And I will also +1 Hopin, an Icebreaker, and Zoom webinar. And I think those are the main ones we're using right now. But you guys covered almost all of them. Cool. So I'm going to ask you all one more question. And while the panelists are answering this, please go ahead and start putting your questions in the chat so we can get to those right after this one. So I think this is kind of like the end all be all to this conversation, is how after COVID is over or we're allowed to return to some form of normalcy, what changes that you've made to your community do you think will be lasting? Like, how do you think this is going to long-term or affect your programs long-term? And we can start with whoever has the first thought.
I'll start.
Yeah.
I think that there is absolutely room for that kind of like hybrid approach. I think some of the great positives that have come, well, so when in April, we decided to host a summit, like a small global connect summit for our community. And it was kind of a like, if we can dream it, we can do it. We're just going to do everything. Let's throw all of our ideas out there and try all of them and see what works, what doesn't. And some of the incredible positives that came from it, I would say one being accessibility. So in-person meetups, both like small and conference size, require people to travel, whether it's to downtown or flying across the world. It requires a level of physical mobility that not everybody has. It also requires the like financial ability to buy a ticket or a flight, or take time off work or coordinate childcare. I think another huge barrier that we've seen with in-person conferences in the past are the political barriers, like travel bans, that actually hinder community members from being able to enter specific countries. So those are the things that, for me, hosting an in-person event for a global community, those are the things that have always come up as a challenge. So of course, with virtual, we can kind of break a lot of those barriers. I will be the first to say, though, that nothing will ever replace in-person connection, because it's something special happens when you meet in person that we'll never be able to replicate online. But I think finding the best of both worlds. So again, the purpose of your community is ultimately for the members. And so for us, finding that hybrid approach is going to give us the best opportunity to reach more community members, give them more resources, and while still connecting in a meaningful way. So I think there is no going back to normal. I think we're in normal right now, which may be weird, and we're only going to continue to grow and adapt, and things are going to change. So it's kind of exciting and scary,
Yeah.
but mostly exciting.
I can add to that in saying that I was not excited, but I think I'm one of those people who's like, oh, what is this challenge that I can overcome right now? So obviously, you know, once the basic needs were taken care of for myself, my family, my community, I was like, okay, well, what does this really mean? And the things that I keep saying, and I said this to Marcia, who's also in the audience today, is that this is an exciting opportunity for us to look at it as an opportunity first and foremost, if we're able to, and really use it to our advantage, in that it's a way to future-proof our businesses. It's a way for anyone to future-proof their business. If you are only relying on in-person events for your business model, and you don't want to shift, okay, that's up to you. But there will be people who will come in and do that. And I totally agree, this like hybrid approach is going to be something that lasts forever. And the biggest takeaway that we've been doing a lot of these things already. I'm very fortunate that my team, my company sees the value of that. But I think what it does is it encourages us to be even more intentional and thoughtful about what we're doing from a community to our community member strategy, in that these virtual events can help keep the conversation going even when things go back to some sort of in-person element. And it really demonstrates the value of online and remote community even more than before.
100%. No, I couldn't agree more. I think in mostly everything's been said that needs to be said. I'd stick with Tracy there and say that I thought online networking was going to be rubbish. I thought it was going to be absolutely naff. I really was not looking forward to it. But I've been pleasantly surprised by the ability to connect, the ability to meet each other, and also still be learning and having this opportunity. I mean, as already has been pointed out, I mean, there's 260 people in this room right now, and every one of those would have had to get a flight into a physical location or whatever it may be, you know. And not only is there an environmental impact right there, but there's also the accessibility thing, which I think is just amazing. So, you know, I'm excited for the future of events as well, because I think we've all got the opportunity for our communities to have a far broader reach, but also one that can be far more significant than just the rooms that they're in at the time.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you all said. And Beth, when you were talking about that portion, it really moves me because I think there has been a lot of community members who have really been trying to advocate for this hybrid approach because of those reasons that you mentioned, whether it's the economic, geographical, health, or accessibility reasons. They were previously being told that no, hybrid approach can't happen. We can't have a virtual meeting. But now that I look in the corporate world, we have just set the precedent that online events, online conferences, and online summits can happen and they can be incredibly successful. So I would say for attendees and for your customers, like continue to advocate for that. You know it's possible now. So it's almost a push from you to push everyone to be this hybrid community. And to what Joe was saying, I'm really excited for the disruption that I think is going to happen. I think if you are someone who gets really excited about the experience of an event or how to interact with your attendees or just how to create that feel, this is your time to really disrupt everything that's out there and create new technology, new ideas.
Awesome. Yes, agree with all of that. And I also love how many people brought up accessibility. That's been a huge thing for us as well. And also just being able to connect our community leaders from around the world and have these like incredible events where they're not only blending their experiences from the other side of the world, but cultures. So we've had people from like Pakistan partner with people from Japan and Canada and the UK, and that's just been really cool to watch that happen organically. Awesome. And audience now. This one is from John, and I think this is super relevant to most people watching. He says, I work at a company with a large online community, but no community manager. What's a good way to pitch a creative brief? I know, echo Tracy's face. What's a good way to pitch a creative brief to my leadership team and have them see the value of a community manager? This kind of goes back to metrics. Yeah, go for it, Joe.
Yeah, I think it's like any, for me, I approach it, I'm a marketer, so I approach it from a marketing perspective, which is there is absolutely no harm to be done in getting your company known for looking to support the community and the customers within it. There is also something to be said that if you are looking to build any kind of branding activity, then there's an appreciation that there's a long-term play here, which is a branding play, which is, okay, we would like to be known for a certain thing, so therefore we need to invest in a set of activities that are going to match that. Finally, it's about sort of like building out that quote-unquote funnel, and this is me being a marketing nerd, but like, of course, if you can spend the time to actually understand, okay, these community members in 12, 18 months, they're actually converting into customers, or, you know, they're actually bringing in other members who would never have interacted with my brand before. These are all really solid arguments for community, but it does require the buy-in from senior management and other individuals to say, look, we appreciate that the payoff may not be today, the payoff might be in 12, 18 months, but actually what we're doing is building a far greater buzz, far greater amount of people aware of what we're doing. Apologies if you had the dog in the background there as well.
I usually start off meetings by saying, if someone has a dog or a child, please put them on camera, like kind of like the Lion King, because I love both.
So this is Eric. So there we go.
Hello. I think, Joe, to add to what you said, you know, at the end of the day, your senior leadership may care most about what metric you can show, and perhaps that's a correlation between, although I'll say sometimes metrics are challenging to get if you don't have the infrastructure from an engineering or an analytical perspective to show conversions or whatever it is. But, you know, find something, figure out first what your stakeholders really care about, and then translate your community value for that for them. You know, is it the number of leads, you know, that are, as Joe mentioned, or is it the amount of activity that they're taking in your product, or, you know, are they more engaged? And then kind of start from there and say, and I was trying to think of a proper analogy. It's like, you wouldn't have a school without teachers. Although I was like, yes, in traditional sense, sure. But then I think about how much I like then I kind of like talk myself out of that, because I was like, no, I think about my own community and how they're teaching each other everything. And like, we're just there to be like, yeah, that's great, or positively reinforce, or to gently guide them in a different direction. So maybe not the best analogy, but yeah, I think find one or two key metrics and then say, this is why we have a CEO at our company, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
Agreed. Beth or Sophia, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to feel like such a CMX/Bevy fangirl, because I totally am. But I would say to Tracy and Joe's point, if you can't find the metrics, but you know that there is an opportunity for you to really, leverage community and advocate for getting a community team, I would say on CMX and Bevy, like they have done a lot of work to pull together case studies that show the value of community. So that's something that I personally found has been really helpful, especially when going to executives. It's almost playing on that competitive feel of like, oh, well, we're not doing this, but did you hear that our competitor XYZ is doing this, and here's how successful they are. I think we should do it. And sometimes that really motivates people to want to agree with you and then jump on your boat.
Interesting.
Awesome.
I can share some blog posts in the chat if it helps, because we do have a lot of resources about this. And I think just to bring it back down to like the very beginning, like so one of the things that I started to do in the very beginning of my community building kind of career path was, okay, I looked at how many ticket sales we had for an event, and I looked at the people and their emails, and I actually wrote down if I had met them, or if I had talked to them, or if I had brought them into the community. And then I added up all of the ticket sales and said, okay, so my interactions are worth this much money. So even something as basic as like, this is the dollar amount that I brought in, can kind of get you into that mindset of like, okay, how else can I prove the value of this? So like I said, I'll drop some links into the chat for some blogs.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And this might seem like too simple of advice, but if they won't give you approval for a full-time hire, just start doing really small things yourself to prove that it's worth it. And then eventually they won't be able to say no, because you have the data to back it up. I want to be mindful of everyone having at least a 3-minute break before the next panels. But I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for being here today. It's very clear that you've built communities that really impact people professionally and also help with their development. So just thank you all for doing that meaningful work. I know your communities really appreciate it too. And also thank you to everyone watching. Thank you for joining our panel.